and welcome to another examination video. Today we are taking a look at Dinks the Puppet, a YouTube channel focused on Christian apologetics. I won't be looking at any of his theological claims though. Instead, I will be focusing on the offhand remarks that he often makes regarding, quote, many studies that claim to show a correlation between scientific evidence and biblical events. Studies which are never quoted or cited, only alluded to. If only Dinks put in the same effort into researching, quoting, and citing reliable scientific studies as he does Bible verses, which nearly always have direct quotes and on-screen citation. Well, let's get into it. I'm not going to look at the legitimacy of a worldwide flood as depicted in the Bible in general. I'm only going to look at the specific claims that Dinks puts forward as scientific evidence in favor of it. In the video titled Debunking Contradictions, published on July 25th, 2025, Dinks makes this claim about the Grand Canyon.
The greatest evidence is the greatest canyon in the United States, the Grand Canyon. It's actually one of the best evidences because if it had formed over millions of years, like they say, the tributary rivers would actually flow in the same direction, but they don't. And that's because it was formed over a flash flood of biblical proportions, where the water pushed through like fingers in the sand. And when the water subsided, what was left is tributaries that have to come in and then turn around to join the Colorado River. That's one example.
Notice how he didn't cite a source or link a website here, and only showed a picture that doesn't even have the tributaries in it that he's making a point about? Let's talk about the Grand Canyon for a minute, so we're all on the same page. The Grand Canyon is located in the U.S. state of Arizona, and is truly a remarkable sight to behold. I've had the pleasure of going there myself, and I can attest that the pictures do not do it justice. It's nearly 300 miles long, about 10 miles across, and a mile deep. That is huge. Again, words are failing to capture the magnitude of what we're talking about. It makes sense that around 5 million people a year come to see this awe-inspiring place. Now let's talk about where Dinks may have gotten his information from about the biblical flash flood. We can only guess since he doesn't cite a source in the video or description, but I think it's likely that this came from the Institute for Creation Research. For those more well-versed in scientific debates, you're probably already rolling your eyes. Theories put forward by this institute are widely rejected, even by other Christian scholars, but I'm not going to get into that today, as there are other much better videos on that subject, and again, we don't know for sure that this is the source that Dinks is using. Either way, I hate that I now have to cite the ICR in one of my videos. The crux of the flash flood argument is that tributaries don't naturally form over millions of years, and that's because the flow of tributaries and rivers would have to change or even reverse. Flows of rivers would have to go uphill, which is impossible. The theory of lakes forming and then suddenly draining into a river, causing erosion like a dam breaking, does not have enough physical evidence to support it. And the timing of uplifting, where tectonic upheaval created plateaus and valleys, is different in this theory than it is in widely accepted mainstream view. And if you're wondering what the angle is for this particular theory being put forward, it's that the Earth is actually very young and not the millions or billions of years old that the mainstream scientific community believes it to be. The problem is, like many pseudoscience articles from this organization, it misrepresents the mainstream scientific consensus, misunderstands the basic scientific principles that it's trying to debunk, and then uses their own asserted premise to disprove incompatible theories. In other words, they have a very simple playbook. Straw man, present a false dilemma, solve the fake issue with a claim that you've never proven. But you wouldn't rely on a source that is like this, Dinks, right? I mean, after all.
I'm not anti-science, but I am anti-accepting theory as fact just because it fits my preconceived idea.
While I was researching this particular angle, I came across this interesting paper presented by geologist Carol Hill and Stephen Moshier, wherein they say that the flood theory presented by the ICR is actually contradictory to the Bible itself. I will leave a link in the description if you're interested in the full study. It is quite lengthy and has a lot of information in it. But the ICR and their ilk are rather famous for goalpost shifting, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how their article makes no sense if you understand even the rudiments of geology. Rather, let's talk about what those evil mainstream scientists actually think. There are no abnormal tributaries in the Grand Canyon. You can see very similar analogs in other canyons across the world. To personify a little, rivers don't care about going east, west, north, or south, or lining up in a certain way. They follow one rule: flow downhill. And they do. No credible geologist has ever proposed otherwise for the Grand Canyon, despite what the ICR article claims. So, yes, there are tributaries that flow in a different cardinal direction than the Colorado River. So, who cares? They all flow downhill and have always flowed downhill. It's just that the direction that downhill is in has changed a few times throughout history. But that's normal, expected, and explained in the mainstream view, pun somewhat intended. Okay, but how can I still say how old it is? I mean, you can't prove that, right? Wrong. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, lava flowed over the Grand Canyon and dammed up part of it. We can see evidence of the water cutting through the lava layer over time, which proves that the Grand Canyon was in existence at the time that the lava flowed through. I know that Dinks will likely disagree with the radiometric dating because it disagrees with his worldview, but wait, that can't be right because
I'm not anti-science, but I am anti-accepting theory as fact just because it fits my preconceived idea.
Or maybe Dinks simply knows something about a flaw in argon radiometric dating that the rest of us are unaware of. Of course, you would have to disprove uranium-thorium dating as well, since the caves that have limestone deposits in the area also date the timeline as being millions of years long. The thing is, I don't have to be specific in age, since anything over tens of thousands of years is enough to disprove the flood theory for the purposes that Dinks puts it forward. Next, we have a funny tree.
Or how about this one, where you have a giant tree, fossilized, going up through the different strata of rock that are supposedly millions of years old.
Alright, easy enough to explain. That's a tree that was buried upright by river sediment, volcanic ash, or other deposits, gradually during ordinary local events. Once it was buried, the mineral-rich water penetrated the wood and gradually replaced the wood tissue with minerals, forming stone. In other words, it's exactly like you said. That is a fossil of a tree. We have examples of these all over, and they don't disprove anything about the dating techniques of the surrounding rock. I'm a little confused as to why you think it does. To put the process simply, step 1. A tree grows in an environment prone to rapid sedimentation, such as a swamp, volcanic slope, delta, or floodplain. Step 2. A flood, a normal one, a biblical flood is not required. Volcanic mud flow or landslide deposits a layer of sediment around the trunk. Successive events add new layers, burying it deeper. The buried tree dies and fossilizes as minerals replace the wood. And then step 5. Continued deposits compact the surrounding sediment into multiple distinct rock layers. You now have an upright tree preserved through several strata. The layer around the tree's base represents the age of the tree, and each layer on top of that is a successive layer left later in time. To be clear, one layer isn't representative of millions of years, just successive, geologically short-term events that happen one after another within the system. If Dinks is using the Institute for Creation Research as a source, I can understand how he's confused, since they also seem to have a really difficult time understanding this relatively simple geological process. But let's continue, because Dinks isn't done with the flood stuff yet.
They found seashells on the top of mountains. Those seashells should not be there, because even if you're going to say, well, they were once on the ocean floor and things moved around, those seashells are way too developed to be as millions of years old as the top of mountains would be.
Aw, come on, Dinks, you were right there. You had it. You literally explained how this happened. Tectonic shifting. But then you just hand wave it and say that the fossils are too developed to be as old as they are without providing a source or even a picture of what you're talking about. So with this argument, Dinks concedes that yes, there are seashells on top of mountains, and yes, the mainstream view is that the now mountaintop used to be on the ocean floor. The problem that Dinks brings up, without citing any sources, is that they are, quote, too developed to be millions of years old. To which I say, what? What do you mean by too developed? An entire fossil bed was found in the Burgess Shale in the Canadian Rockies, containing Cambrian marine life. This was 500 million years ago. This by itself debunks Dinks, since a flood in the mere thousands of years ago would not account for this at all. In fact, a flood would not account for any marine life fossils on mountaintops, because a brief flood covering a rocky mountaintop would not have the conditions conducive to fossil formation to begin with. As for them being too developed, that's sort of what the Cambrian period is known for. The development of marine life, rapidly evolving and forming new niches and strategies. Well, according to Berkeley anyway. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know what Dinks means by too developed, and I'm not convinced that he does either. We're actually getting to Dinks's complaint about how we determine the age of rock layers and fossils.
But I will say that your geological record is completely flawed. It's circular. You date the fossils by what layer of rock you find them in, and then you date the layers of rock by what fossils you find in those. And so you can throw out any millions or billions of years you want, and it changes over and over and over as you make new discoveries.
You're right. That is circular, and it would sure be dumb to do that. Good thing that that's not at all how it works. You reference a single way to date geological data and pretend that that's the only way, as if we're still stuck in the early 1800s. We aren't, and it's not. Radiometric dating gives numerical ages for rocks. It's based on constants, measurable physical processes that we can prove work. Those are used in conjunction with the fossil location in rock layers. The fossils show relativistic timelines. In other words, the sequence, what's older or newer. Radiometric dating gives us ages in hard numbers. Do radiometric date estimates change? Yes, because the process improves and becomes more accurate. We test it against other known, accurate dating methods such as ice cores, magnetic reversals, tree rings, etc., and find that it correlates as expected. Does that clear it up for you?
If your millions or billions of years was true, the James Webb Telescope should have found unformed galaxies when they zoomed in as far as they could. And guess what happened? They found fully formed galaxies. They're trying to wrap their brains around that.
Well, yes, it's true that the James Webb Telescope found galaxies that were more formed than early models predicted. But it's misleading to suggest that researchers were struggling to comprehend that. I mean, adjusting your model to conform with new data is the entire foundation of how science works. It's not dogma that comes crashing down when it's challenged. I'm not sure if Dinks is relying on old information, but the initial observations of the James Webb Space Telescope were also overblown and overestimated at first. However, even the more accurate calibrations still show about twice the development that was expected, but still much less than the initial observation would have suggested. And, of course, this has nothing whatsoever to do with how radiometric dating works, and I don't know why you think this was connected to geological dating to begin with.
There's no metaphorical terms in ancient Hebrew. When it says that God is slow to anger, it literally says he has a long nose. So when they're going to describe something like a big, beautiful sky that's impressive and bold, they'll call it by solid terms like a dome of brass. Now, the waters above, yes, that's still true. There is a vapor canopy that goes all around the world. It still exists today. And there is the theory that the Earth was once surrounded by a thicker layer of water that would actually have filtered out more UV rays and picked up the hyperbaric pressure.
Dinks actually starts out this argument quite well, citing how metaphors work, but then goes on to say that water was not part of the metaphor. What? I guess in response to this segment, I could just say,
Again, someone who does not understand how ancient Hebrew works. There's no metaphorical terms in ancient Hebrew.
but in regards to the vapor canopy, what vapor canopy? Do you mean the ozone layer? Because that's not vapor. Do you mean clouds or other localized vapor? Well, that's not global. What are you talking about? It can't be the vapor in the troposphere, which is the lowest part of the atmosphere and contains about 99% of atmospheric water, because the graphic you use seems to indicate that it's an outer sort of force field-like layer and not a reference to the air that we breathe. It kind of seems like you're mistaking the stratosphere, which contains the ozone layer, as being made out of vapor, since you say that it also blocks UV, which is part of the function of the ozone layer. But what do you mean? A vapor canopy, in the way that you describe, presumably to connect it to a global flood in order to ally with your worldview, has not existed and cannot exist, since a layer of vapor thick enough to do what you're describing would also make the Earth unbearably hot. Unbearably in the literal sense. It would kill all life and make it similar to Venus. This fact is so well acknowledged, by the way, that even the ICR and other creationist sources admit that the vapor canopy theory just doesn't work. Next, Dinks makes the claim that hyperbaric pressure extends life.
Picked up the hyperbaric pressure. This would have extended lifetimes and made plants hardier and more enriching for animals to eat.
I have never heard this claim before outside of the treatment for very specific ailments. Please show me a source which proves this.
In fact, they did this experiment at the Creation Museum where they put piranhas in a tank and then kicked up the hyperbaric pressure. They became the size of dinner plates and became vegetarian. Explain that one to me with your millions of years old theory.
Well, at least it's not the ICR. It's funny to me that this is the first time that you actually cite a source for a scientific claim, and I can't find it anywhere. The closest thing I can find is not from the Creation Museum in Kentucky, but from the Creation Evidence Museum in Texas, where this website claims that there was an experiment done where hyperbaric pressure made fruit flies live through 3 generations, neutralized copperhead snake venom, and caused piranhas to grow from 2 inches to 16 inches over the course of 2.5 years. However, this is not a research paper, it is not peer-reviewed, it doesn't even go into the exact details of the experiments. And I can find no other references to this even taking place except for the existence of a hyperbaric chamber in the Creation Evidence Museum. And besides that, this website doesn't even make the claim that the piranhas suddenly turned into vegetarians. Where did that claim come from? And by the way, the claim that the snake venom was neutralized was based off of the appearance of the snake venom changing under a microscope. I would love to see the original paper that documents the entire experiment, variables, etc., so that we can all have a look at it together. Because right now, it just sort of sounds like you're trying to explain your preconceived belief that biblical characters could have lived for centuries. But you wouldn't do that, right? I mean, after all.
I'm not anti-science, but I am anti-accepting theory as fact just because it fits my preconceived idea.
In conclusion, I do believe that Dinks, or more accurately, his quote, traveling companion, is extremely knowledgeable in the Bible, and even in complex areas like the ancient Hebrew and Greek, as well as the context around various passages. I also think that Dinks is setting out to do something that he believes is important and right. I don't want him to quit what he's doing. I want to point out that including these poorly researched, unsighted, scientific claims only serve to hurt his credibility and indeed the credibility of Christians in general. Even if he believes in the young earth theory, it alienates people who don't reject the mainstream science, a group which I would hope is the majority of people. Dinks, if you happen to watch this, know that I respect you and your traveling companion. I respect what you're doing, and I know how hard and exhausting it can be, especially at the pace that you put out videos. I mean for this video to be a suggestion for improvement and not an attack, and I hope that's how you take it. Well, that's all for now. This was a video. This was a video. This was a difficult video to make since I had to not only research the points that I wanted to make, but also the points that Dinks was making. Luckily, I am quite practiced at that from my Missing 411 reviews. It turns out that it is very easy to just throw out random unbacked claims, and somewhat difficult to take the time to research, vet, and cite sources. If you feel that I've made any mistakes, please feel free to correct me in the comments. That's what they're there for. Until next time, take care.